In the glittering world of New York's elite, Spencer Caldwell was a king. He had the perfect career, a charming smile, and what everyone assumed was a quiet, unassuming wife at home, pregnant with their first child. Tonight at the Starlight Gala, the city's most prestigious charity event, he would risk it all for a passionate public kiss with his stunning mistress, Kinsley Monroe. He believed he was on top of the world, untouchable. But what no one knew, especially him, was that the woman he was about to publicly humiliate wasn't just his wife. She was the one who owned it all. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of man-made stars. Crystals dripped from chandeliers, catching the light and scattering it over a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. This was the annual Starlight Gala for the Children's Health Foundation, the undisputed apex of New York's philanthropic calendar. To be here was to be someone. And tonight, Spencer Caldwell felt like he was everyone. He moved through the crowd with an easy, practiced grace, his hand extended for a firm shake, his lips curved into a smile that promised both influence and intimacy. He was the CEO of Caldwell Development Group, a name that had in the last 5 years become synonymous with sleek, audacious new towers piercing the Manhattan skyline. People saw him as a titan, a self-made man with a Midas touch. They saw the Tom Ford suit the Patek Philippe watch peeking from his cuff, and the confident set of his jaw, and they saw power. "Spencer, my boy," a voice boomed. It was Wyatt Chamberlain, a grizzled tech mogul whose early investments in AI had made him a legend. "Heard you close the Hudson Yards deal. Vicious. I love it." Spencer clapped Wyatt on the back, his smile widening. "You have to be vicious to survive in this city, Wyatt. You taught me that." This was the lie Spencer lived and breathed. It was the most beautiful, most elaborate, and most fragile lie of all. Caldwell Development Group wasn't truly his. The fortune wasn't his. The life he projected, the very air of authority he exhaled, was borrowed. It all belonged to his wife, Genevieve. To the world, and even to Spencer himself, most days, Genevieve Atherton Caldwell was a sweet, slightly naive woman from a family with old money. He told people she had a modest trust fund enough to be comfortable, which had allowed him the freedom to take the initial risks in his career. He painted her as his quiet, supportive rock, the gentle, home-loving woman who preferred a book to a board meeting, a simple dinner at home to a dazzling gala. It was a narrative he had carefully crafted, and over time had come to believe completely. He thought of her now at home in their sprawling Fifth Avenue penthouse, his penthouse as he always called it. She was 7 months pregnant, and he'd used her delicate condition as the perfect excuse for her absence. "Jenna's not feeling up to it tonight," he'd say with a pained, devoted expression. "The pregnancy has been a bit tough on her. I told her she had to rest." The sympathy he received was a delicious bonus. What a dedicated husband people would murmur here to represent them both while his pregnant wife rested. His eyes scanned the room, gliding past familiar faces until they landed on her. Kinsley Monroe. She was standing near the silent auction display, a vision in a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin. Her blonde hair was swept up in an intricate chignon, and diamonds glittered at her throat. Kinsley wasn't just a socialite. She was the senior VP of marketing at a rival firm, a shark in Chanel, and for the past 8 months, Spencer's all-consuming affair. With Kinsley, Spencer felt seen. She didn't just admire his success. She understood the ambition behind it. She spoke the language of mergers, acquisitions, and ruthless takeovers. She saw the man he wanted to be, not the man who owed his life to a modest trust fund. She saw the king, not the consort. Their eyes met across the room. A slow, predatory smile spread across her lips. It was a promise. Spencer gave a subtle nod, his heart thumping with a familiar cocktail of adrenaline and arrogance. He excused himself from Wyatt Chamberlain, murmuring something about checking on a bid. As he walked towards her, he felt the weight of his deception. But it wasn't guilt. It was exhilaration. He was Spencer Caldwell, master of his own universe, successfully juggling a comfortable, compliant wife and a thrilling, brilliant mistress. He believed he had insulated both worlds perfectly. The loving husband at home, the corporate predator in the city. He had it all. He thought about Jenna, her sweet, trusting face, her gentle nature, her current physical state, swollen, tired, and utterly domestic. She was the foundation upon which he had built his real life, the life with Kinsley, a necessary but increasingly dull part of the architecture. Tonight, surrounded by the power players of New York with Kinsley waiting for him, he felt invincible. The lie wasn't a burden. It was a testament to his genius. He had constructed the perfect life, and no one was smart enough to see the seams. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of 1,000 conversations. Spencer navigated the crush of bodies, his focus lasered in on Kinsley. Each step felt like a drumbeat, a countdown to something decisive. He was tired of the shadows, the stolen moments in hotel suites, and late-night calls disguised as business. Tonight felt different. There was a charge in the air, a sense of rebellion brewing in his chest. He reached her at the auction table, where a magnificent sapphire necklace was being displayed under a spotlight. She didn't turn to him immediately, instead feigning interest in the piece, her reflection shimmering in the glass case. They say it belonged to a Russian princess. Kinsley purred her voice, a low thrum that vibrated through him. Fled the revolution, with nothing but the jewels sewn into her coat. A survivor, Spencer said, standing close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. My favorite kind of woman. Her blue eyes, sharp and intelligent, finally met his. Is it Spencer? I thought you preferred them docile, easier to manage. It was a barb, a playful challenge that pricked his ego exactly as she intended. He loved this about her, the way she pushed him, tested him. She wasn't soft and yielding like Genevieve. She was a blade. I manage what needs to be managed, he replied, his voice dropping. And I acquire what I desire. A reporter from the New York Post, a notorious gossip columnist named Brenda Klein, was drifting nearby her eyes like a hawk's. Spencer saw her. He knew she was watching. A sensible man would have created distance. A cautious man would have offered a polite nod and moved on. But Spencer was neither sensible nor cautious tonight. He was fueled by champagne and a deep, gnawing hunger to be seen as the man he pretended to be, a man who took what he wanted. Consequences be damned. People are watching. Kinsley murmured, a flicker of something excitement, apprehension in her eyes. Let them, Spencer whispered back, a reckless grin spreading across his face. This was his stage. These were his people. And Kinsley was his prize. He wanted them to see. He wanted the world to know that he, Spencer Caldwell, was the kind of man who commanded a woman like this. It was the ultimate status symbol. He leaned in his hand, coming up to gently cup her jaw. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, made shockingly public. A wave of whispers rippled through their immediate vicinity. Phones discreetly at first, then more brazenly were raised. The soft clicks of camera shutters began to blend with the string quartet's melody. Brenda Klein's eyes widened. She had just struck gossip gold. Kinsley's breath hitched. This was more than she had expected. A public claim, a declaration. In her mind, this was the final move in a long chess game. The moment he finally chose her casting aside the dowdy pregnant wife no one ever saw. This was her coronation. Spencer didn't see Genevieve's face in his mind. He didn't think of the baby of their vows, of the quiet woman who believed his every word. He thought only of the power of the moment, the sheer audacity of it. He was shedding his last link to the man who had needed a trust fund and becoming the titan who answered to no one. He closed the small gap between them and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck. It was a deep, searing kiss full of a pent-up passion and a desperate need for validation. It was a performance. For a few breathtaking seconds, the ambient noise of the gala seemed to fade away, replaced by a focused electric silence. The flashes from phones and Brenda Klein's photographer became a strobe light, capturing the betrayal from a dozen different angles. When he finally pulled back, Kinsley's lips were slightly swollen, her eyes wide with triumph. Spencer felt a surge of pure, unadulterated power. He had done it. He had laid his claim in front of the whole world. He turned his head slightly, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips as he surveyed the shocked faces around him. He met Wyatt Chamberlain's gaze. The older man wasn't smiling. He simply raised a curious eyebrow, a look of detached appraisal on his face. Spencer didn't care. He felt reborn. In his mind, the old world had just burned down, and from the ashes rose the king he was always meant to be with his new queen by his side. The sound of the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The scandal was the only thing that mattered in the room now. And then a different sound cut through the noise. The grand double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open, pushed by two uniformed attendants. The chatter near the entrance died down first, the silence spreading like a wave rolling through the crowd until it reached the very spot where Spencer and Kinsley stood, frozen in their tableau of infidelity. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. A hush, profound and absolute, descended upon the Starlight Gala. Standing in the grand archway, silhouetted for a moment against the brighter light of the hall, was a figure that sent a jolt of ice-cold dread through Spencer's veins. It was Genevieve. But it wasn't the Genevieve he had left at home a few hours ago. It wasn't the woman who lived in soft cashmere sweaters and favored comfortable flats. It wasn't the quiet, unassuming Jenna whose presence was so easy to overlook. The woman who stood before the hushed ballroom was an apparition of power. She wore a bespoke gown of deep emerald silk that fell in a clean, severe line, artfully tailored to accommodate her pregnancy without hiding it. It made her look not fragile, but regal, like a queen carrying an heir. Her usually soft brown hair was styled in a sleek, elegant chignon, and a cascade of diamonds, not gaudy, but substantial and severe, glittered around her neck. Her face, which he so often characterized as sweet, was composed and unreadable, her posture radiating a stillness and authority he had never seen before. She didn't look sick. She didn't look delicate. She looked formidable. Spencer's blood ran cold. The triumphant heat from his kiss with Kinsley vanished, replaced by a chilling panic. What was she doing here? How did she know? The questions ricocheted around his skull. His mind raced, scrambling for a narrative, a lie that could possibly contain this. He could say she was delirious, that the pregnancy had made her unstable. He could accuse her of being hysterical. He could play the concerned husband. Beside him, Kinsley stiffened. "Who is that?" she whispered, her voice tight with confusion. She had only ever seen blurry photos of Genevieve pictures from a time before Spencer had curated his public image. The woman in those photos looked plain. This woman was anything but. "It's my wife," Spencer hissed, his voice barely audible. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Genevieve took a step into the room, and then another, She didn't look at the gawking crowd. Her eyes, cool and direct, were fixed on him. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her composure an unnerving contrast to the frantic, scandalous energy that had just filled the room. The guests parted before her, as if by an invisible force, creating a wide, clear path from the doors directly to where Spencer stood with Kinsley. It felt like the longest walk in history. With every step she took, Spencer's carefully constructed world began to fracture. The whispers started again, but they were different now. They weren't just gossiping about an affair. They were witnessing a confrontation of epic proportions. "My God, that's Genevieve Caldwell," someone murmured. "I thought she was unwell," another whispered. "Look at her. She looks incredible," said a third. Brenda Klein, the reporter, was practically vibrating with glee. Her photographer was snapping photos, furiously capturing every nuance of the unfolding drama: Spencer's ashen face, Kinsley's dawning horror, and Genevieve's relentless calm advance. Spencer felt an overwhelming urge to run, to simply turn and bolt from the room, but he was pinned in place by the weight of 1,000 stares, and most of all by Genevieve's unwavering gaze. He tried to assemble his features into a mask of concern. He would handle this. He had always been able to handle her. "Jenna, darling," he began, his voice strained as she finally came to a stop a few feet before them. "What are you doing here? You should be resting. Are you all right?" He reached for her arm, a gesture meant to convey loving control, to re-establish his role as the caring husband, managing his emotional pregnant wife. Genevieve moved her arm just slightly, a small, almost imperceptible motion that caused his hand to miss its target. It was a rejection so subtle, yet so absolute, that it felt like a slap. Her eyes, which he had always thought of as soft and forgiving, were now as hard and brilliant as the diamonds at her throat. She didn't look at him with the pain of a betrayed wife. She looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. Then, for the first time, her gaze shifted, moving from his face to Kinsley's. She looked her up and down, a slow, clinical assessment that made Kinsley flush with a mixture of anger and shame. This was not the confrontation she had envisioned. She had imagined a tearful, hysterical wife she could easily dismiss. This woman was an entirely different and terrifying creature. Genevieve's eyes finally returned to Spencer. The corner of her mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. It was something colder. "Resting?" she said, her voice clear and calm, carrying easily in the dead silence of the ballroom. "I've been resting for 5 years, Spencer. I decided it was time to get back to work." The words made no sense to him. Back to work. Her work was charity lunches and managing the household staff. He was the one who worked. He was the CEO. The king was on his stage, but the ghost at the feast had just revealed she held the script, and no one, least of all Spencer, knew what the next line was. Spencer stared at her, his mind struggling to process her words. "Back to work, Jenna. You're not well. You're pregnant, emotional. Let's not make a scene. Let's go home and talk about this." He was trying to reassert his narrative, painting her as an irrational woman in the grip of hormones. It was his last, desperate defense. Genevieve let out a soft, humorless laugh. The sound was so alien coming from her that it startled him. "A scene," she repeated, her gaze sweeping across the rapt audience. "Spencer, you already made the scene when you put your tongue down this woman's throat in a room full of photographers. I'm merely here for the closing act." Kinsley flinched as if struck. "You have no right," she began, but Genevieve cut her off with a look so chilling it froze the words in her throat. "I have every right," Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a steely quiet. Her attention returned to Spencer, who was now visibly sweating under the hot ballroom lights. "You're right about one thing. We should talk. Let's talk about work." She took another step closer. "Let's talk about Caldwell Development Group, a name you chose. I always found it a bit presumptuous." A murmur went through the crowd. Spencer's heart hammered against his ribs. "What are you talking about, Jenna? I built that company from the ground up." "Did you?" she asked, tilting her head. "Did you secure the initial seed funding of $50 million? Did you leverage existing assets to underwrite the astronomical loans for the Hudson Yards project? Did you negotiate the zoning variances with the City Planning Commission, calling in favors that have been in my family for 3 generations?" Each question was a precise surgical strike, dismantling his life's work, his life's lie, piece by piece. Spencer's face went from pale to a blotchy, panicked red. "That was your trust fund. You said you wanted to support my dream." "My trust fund," she said, the words dripping with sarcasm, "is called Atherton Global Enterprises. It is a multi-billion-dollar privately held conglomerate founded by my great-grandfather. It is not some quaint little pot of money I was given to buy jewelry and support my husband's dreams." The name Atherton Global hung in the air, electric and stunning. Wyatt Chamberlain, the tech mogul, took a sharp, audible breath. Others in the room who understood the true scale of global finance gasped. Atherton Global wasn't just a company. It was an empire with vast holdings in real estate technology and energy. It was notoriously private, a silent giant whose influence was felt everywhere, but whose leadership was almost never seen. Genevieve's gaze flickered to Wyatt. "Mr. Chamberlain, a pleasure to see you again. My father always spoke very highly of your foresight in the tech sector before he passed." Wyatt, a man who intimidated presidents, looked utterly flawed. You're William Atherton's daughter," he stammered. "The only one," Genevieve confirmed, her voice ringing with an authority that was bone-deep and undeniable. "And since his death 2 years ago, I have been the majority shareholder and acting chair of the board." The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. Spencer felt the floor drop out from under him. It wasn't possible. The sweet, simple girl he'd met in a library, who claimed to be an art history major with a comfortable but not extravagant background. It was all a lie far more vast and complex than his own. He had been the one being managed, the one being played from the very beginning. She turned back to him, her eyes now filled with a cold, clear pity. "Caldwell Development Group is not your company, Spencer. It is a minor subsidiary of Atherton's real estate division, a little project I set up for you. A sandbox, if you will. I wanted to see what you would build if you thought you were the king." She paused, her gaze flicking over to Kinsley. "And I've seen." Kinsley Munro's perfectly made-up face had crumbled into a mask of pure disbelief. Her ambition, her entire strategy, had been based on trading up, on securing the powerful man. She had just publicly attached herself to the court jester while humiliating the Empress. The scale of her miscalculation was so immense, it was dizzying. Genevieve wasn't finished. She gestured vaguely at the opulent ballroom around them. "This gala, this entire foundation, it is one of my family's largest philanthropic endeavors. I chair the executive board. You are here tonight, Spencer, not as a titan of industry, but as my guest. My +1. The humiliation was absolute. Every eye in the room was on Spencer, but they no longer saw a powerful CEO caught in a moment of indiscretion. They saw a fraud, a kept man who had gotten too big for his britches, a fool who had betrayed a woman who could buy and sell the entire city block they were standing on. A tall, silver-haired man had appeared at Genevieve's side. It was Oliver Bennett, her family's lawyer, a man Spencer had met a handful of times and dismissed as a stuffy old retainer. Oliver's expression was grimly satisfied. He held a thick leather folio. "Mr. Caldwell," Oliver said in a crisp, formal tone, "if I may have a word." But Genevieve held up a hand. "One last thing in public, since you seem to favor it," she said to Spencer. "The penthouse you live in is owned by an Atherton holding company. The cars you drive are leased by the same. The credit cards in your wallet are tied to my family's central account. As of an hour ago, you no longer have access to any of them." She finally looked at his face, truly looked, and saw the utter devastation there. For a flicker of a second, a hint of something sadness perhaps crossed her features, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "You said you built your empire from the ground up," she said, her voice a final damning whisper. "Let's see you do it." The silence that followed Genevieve's final declaration was heavier and more profound than before. It was the silence of a completed execution. Spencer stood there, a hollowed-out mannequin in a Tom Ford suit. The identity he had so carefully constructed had not just been questioned, it had been annihilated in under 5 minutes. Then the noise returned. Not all at once, but in a rising tide of frantic whispers, shocked exclamations, and the merciless, incessant clicking of camera shutters. Brenda Klein was dictating furiously into her phone, her voice a low, venomous hiss, ensuring every detail of this spectacular downfall would make the morning edition. Spencer's world narrowed to a tunnel. He saw Wyatt Chamberlain, the man he had been so desperate to impress, slowly shake his head with a look that was part pity, part disgust, before turning his back and walking away. He saw other business associates, men he'd played golf with and made deals with, actively avoiding his gaze, melting back into the crowd as if he were radioactive. He turned to Kinsley, a desperate, drowning man, looking for a life raft. But Kinsley was staring at Genevieve with a horrified awe. The woman she had dismissed as a domestic afterthought was a titan of a magnitude she couldn't even comprehend. Kinsley's ambition had led her to bet on a pawn, mistaking it for a king, and now she was standing in the middle of a checkmate on the losing side. Her eyes met Spencer's, and for a moment he saw their entire affair for what it was, a transaction. He was her leverage, her step up, and his value had just plummeted to less than 0. Without a word, Kinsley Monroe, the shark in Chanel, gathered what was left of her dignity, turned and disappeared into the throng, leaving him utterly alone. That was when Oliver Bennett stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Caldwell." Spencer flinched, turning to the lawyer as if seeing him for the first time. Oliver opened the leather folio. "These are for you." He slid a sheaf of papers into Spencer's numb hand. The top page was a formal notice of termination from his position as CEO of Caldwell Development Group, effective immediately. Beneath that was a restraining order, preventing him from coming within 500 feet of Genevieve Atherton or any property owned by Atherton Global, including his Know Her home. The final document was a petition for divorce, citing adultery and fraud. "Security will escort you from the premises," Oliver stated calmly. "A box containing your personal effects, anything you owned prior to your marriage, has been delivered to a modest hotel downtown. The reservation is in your name for 1 night. After that, you are on your own." 2 large men in black suits, who had been standing discreetly by the door, began to move toward Spencer. The public humiliation was now complete. He was going to be physically thrown out. He looked at Genevieve one last time, a desperate plea in his eyes. He saw no anger, no hatred, he saw something far worse: indifference. She had already moved on. She was speaking quietly with Wyatt Chamberlain, who now looked at her with newfound, profound respect. She was no longer Genevieve Caldwell, the scorned wife. She was Genevieve Atherton, the head of an empire reasserting her control. She didn't even give him a parting glance. The security guards reached him, their hands gently but firmly on his elbows. As they guided him through the parting sea of shocked faces, he could hear the whispers like a physical assault. A complete fraud. Can you believe the audacity? She played him the entire time. Brilliant! He had everything and threw it all away. The walk of shame out of the ballroom, through the gilded lobby of the Pierre, and out onto the cold, unforgiving pavement of East 61st Street was a blur. The cool night air hit his face, feeling like a slap. He stood there on the sidewalk, the legal papers clutched in his hand, as the doorman hailed a cab for a laughing couple. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. The screen read, "Access denied. Corporate account locked." He tried his personal banking app. Insufficient funds. The Patek Philippe on his wrist felt like a lead weight, a relic from a life that was no longer his. He was no longer Spencer Caldwell, CEO. He was just a man in a borrowed suit, standing on a street corner, in a city that had, in the space of a single evening, chewed him up and spat him out. The glass house he had built for himself had not just been broken, it had been shattered into microscopic dust, and he had nothing left but the cuts from the falling shards. 5 years earlier, a quiet corner of the New York Public Library's Rose Main reading room. Genevieve Atherton, then 27, sat surrounded by books on Renaissance art, a field she genuinely loved. She was hiding, not from a person, but from a name. The name Atherton was a brand, a headline, a dollar sign. It was a gravitational force that warped every human interaction around it. Potential friends saw an opportunity. Potential partners saw a jackpot. After a particularly galling breakup with a European aristocrat, who, had it turned out, hired a private investigator to value her family's holdings before proposing, she had decided to conduct an experiment. She enrolled in a master's program at Columbia under her mother's maiden name, rented a modest apartment in the West Village, and told everyone she met that her family was comfortable. She wanted just once to be loved, or even just liked, for who she was, not what she was worth. That's when she met Spencer Caldwell. He was in the MBA program, hungry, charming, and radiating an almost painful ambition. He saw a beautiful, intelligent, and seemingly normal woman. He was captivated by her quiet confidence, which he mistook for simplicity. He loved that she wasn't jaded or demanding like the other women he knew who were chasing wealth. She fell for the man she thought he was. He seemed to see her. He listened to her talk about Botticelli for hours. He brought her coffee during late-night study sessions. He spoke passionately about his dreams of building things, of creating a legacy. For the first time, Genevieve felt like a partner, not a prize, so she let the lie of omission grow. When he asked about her family, she told him they were in private equity and left it at that. When marriage came up, she invented the modest trust fund. She told herself it was a test. If he loved her for who she was, with just this, then, when she finally told him the truth, their foundation would be unshakable. She would give him the world, because he hadn't asked for it. Oliver Bennett had been apoplectic. "Genevieve, this is madness," the old family lawyer had warned. "You are building a marriage on a false premise. This man's ambition is a hunger that can't be filled. By giving him a taste of power without the context of its source, you are creating a monster." She hadn't listened. She was in love. They married in a small, elegant ceremony, which she justified as her preference for privacy. She then established Caldwell Development Group, positioning it as a risky venture funded by her trust. She gave Spencer the title of CEO and let him run. At first, it was thrilling. She enjoyed watching him work, seeing his ideas take shape. But slowly, things began to change. The more successful he became, the more he changed. He started to patronize her. Her opinions on business, which were in fact sharper and more informed than his, were dismissed as sweet but naive. He started calling her Jenna, a diminutive she'd never liked, making her sound smaller, simpler. He'd come home from the office full of his own importance. "You wouldn't understand the pressure, Jenna. We're playing in the big leagues." He was unaware that he was a minor league player in a stadium she owned using her equipment. The red flags she had once ignored became impossible to miss. The way he took credit for her ideas, the way he talked about their home, their life as his, the subtle condescension in his voice when she'd talk about her art history passions. He began to see her not as his partner, but as his docile domestic support system, the silent, adoring wife his grand public image required. When she discovered she was pregnant, a part of her hoped it would change things, bring them back to the beginning. Instead, it only solidified her role in his mind. She was now the mother of his heir, her purpose fulfilled. He grew more distant, more consumed by his work, and as she would soon discover by his affair. The final brutal awakening came not from a private investigator, but from a stray email. He had been using her laptop and had forgotten to log out. An exchange with Kinsley Monroe was open on the screen. It wasn't just the affair that wounded her. It was the way he wrote about her. "She's a good woman, but simple, perfectly content to nest. You and I, we're eagles, Kinsley. We're meant for the sky, not the cage, no matter how gilded. A simple woman, content to nest." In that moment, the love she had held for him curdled into a cold, hard resolve. Oliver had been right. She had not created a partner. She had created a monster, fed by her resources and his own bottomless ego. The pain of the betrayal was immense, but the Atherton blood in her veins ran deep. It was pragmatic and ruthless when it needed to be. She would not cry. She would not scream. She would not allow him the satisfaction of seeing her as a hysterical, pregnant wife. She would let him fly as high as he possibly could. She would let him feel the sun on his wings. And then, at the peak of his hubris, she would personally and publicly remind him that the sky he was flying in belonged to her. For 2 months she planned. She had Oliver prepare the documents. She chose the venue and the moment with the precision of a military strategist. The Starlight Gala, his favorite event, his stage. It would become the theater of his undoing. In the harsh light of the day, after the world had shifted on its axis, for both Spencer and Kinsley. Spencer woke up on the stiff polyester sheets of a 3-star hotel near Times Square, the roar of the city, a mocking reminder of the kingdom he had lost. His tuxedo was crumpled on the floor. His head throbbed. He looked at his reflection in the cheap mirror. A stranger with hollowed eyes stared back. His phone was a wasteland. Every contact from his old life bankers, investors' so-called friends, was silent. The only calls he got were from reporters. He was no longer a subject of admiration, but of ridicule. The story was everywhere. The +1 prince, billionaire heiress's epic takedown of cheating husband. He was a meme, a cautionary tale. Desperate, he called the one person he thought was still on his side. Kinsley. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice clipped and cold. "What do you want, Spencer?" "Kins, we have to talk," he pleaded. "We can figure this out. I can start again. We can build something together for real this time." A bitter, incredulous laugh crackled through the phone. "Build what, Spencer? You have nothing. Less than nothing. You have debt, you have scandal, and you have the most powerful woman in the city as your sworn enemy. What could you possibly offer me?" "I thought you loved me." He said the words, sounding pathetic, even to his own ears. "I was in love with the man you pretended to be." She shot back, her voice laced with venom. "The powerful, self-made CEO. That man never existed. You were a fraud, and you made me look like a fool. My firm's board is meeting this afternoon to discuss the reputational damage from this incident. They're talking about invoking the morality clause in my contract. You didn't just ruin your life, you've crippled mine. So that's it. You're just cutting me loose." "I'm cutting my losses," she corrected him. "Don't ever call me again." The line went dead. Kinsley's prediction was correct. She was fired by the end of the day. The brand she worked for couldn't afford to be associated with such a sordid and high-profile scandal. Her name was now synonymous with being the other woman in the most spectacular marital implosion the city had seen in decades. The invitations stopped coming. The calls weren't returned. In a city that worships success, she had aligned herself with the ultimate failure. She had flown too close to the sun, only to discover it was a bonfire someone else had lit, and she was the one who got burned. Spencer spent the next few weeks in a daze of disbelief and rage. He tried to hire a lawyer to fight the divorce settlement, but no reputable firm would take his case against Atherton Global's legal team. He was offered a pittance, a legal dissolution of the marriage, with no claim to any assets, as per the ironclad prenuptial agreement he had foolishly signed, believing it was a formality for her little trust fund. He was forced to sell the Patek Philippe watch just to pay for a deposit on a tiny apartment in Queens. He applied for jobs, but his name was now toxic. No one would hire the man who had been so publicly castrated. The hubris that had once defined him curdled into a bitter, impotent resentment. He had flown so high he had truly believed the power was his. He had forgotten, or perhaps never understood, that he was not the eagle. He was merely the feather in its wing. While Spencer's world imploded, Genevieve's expanded. The morning after the gala, she walked into the main boardroom of Atherton Global's headquarters. The space was intimidating, a vast room of steel and glass overlooking Central Park. The board members, a collection of grizzled, powerful men who had served her father for decades, were all assembled. They had respected her as the owner, but had largely treated her as a figurehead. Today was different. As she entered, they all stood, not out of mere courtesy, but out of a new, profound respect. The story of the Starlight Gala had ripped through the financial world. They had all seen the news. They had seen the quiet heiress reveal the steel spine they had forgotten she possessed. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice calm and steady as she took her place at the head of the table. "As you know, I have been largely hands-off for the past few years. I was engorged in a long-term due diligence project. That project is now complete. The results have been illuminating." A wry smile touched her lips, and for the first time she saw an answering glimmer of admiration in their eyes. "Effective immediately," she continued, "I am dissolving the subsidiary known as Caldwell Development Group and absorbing its assets back into the primary real estate portfolio. I will also be taking a direct hands-on role as executive chairwoman in all major corporate decisions. The era of silent partnership is over." There were no objections. There was only assent. In one night she had transformed her image from that of a reclusive heiress to a decisive, formidable leader. She had proven she was her father's daughter, not just in name, but in action. In the months that followed, Genevieve thrived. She was a natural, possessing an instinct for business that had been honed by a lifetime of listening and observing from the sidelines. She was sharp, insightful, and when necessary, utterly ruthless. She wasn't just running her father's company. She was remaking it in her own image, pushing into sustainable energy and ethical technologies. Her personal life also found a new, more authentic equilibrium. She moved out of the opulent Fifth Avenue penthouse, which had always felt more like Spencer's stage than her home. She settled in a beautiful light-filled brownstone downtown, closer to the art galleries she loved. One afternoon, standing in the newly painted nursery, a calm, serene space of soft greys and yellows, she felt the baby kick. She placed a hand on her belly, a genuine, unforced smile gracing her lips. This child would not grow up in a house built on lies. This child would be an Atherton, not by name only, but by the example its mother would set. A legacy of strength, integrity, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge of one's own worth. She had been betrayed, but she had not been broken. She had lost a husband, but she had found herself. She had stepped out of the gilded cage he had built around her, only to realize she had been holding the key all along. The Queen was home, and her reign was just beginning. 6 months passed. Winter had thawed into a vibrant New York spring. Genevieve Atherton, now visibly in the final trimester of her pregnancy, had become one of the most talked-about figures in the global financial scene. Her takeover of Atherton Global was no longer just society gossip. It was a Wall Street legend. She had proven to be as shrewd and visionary as her father, but with a modern, more ethical approach that was winning both profits and praise. The peace, however, was not absolute. Empires always have rivals. A corporate raider named Alistair Finch, a notoriously aggressive vulture capitalist, saw the public turmoil of the Caldwell scandal as a potential vulnerability. Believing the company was still reeling from the leadership shift, he began quietly buying up blocks of Atherton Global's publicly traded debt, hoping to initiate a hostile takeover. The board was nervous. They convened an emergency meeting, the air thick with tension. Oliver Bennett laid out the threat in stark terms. Finch is ruthless. He's leveraging the narrative that the company is unstable, that your personal life has become a professional liability. Genevieve listened calmly, her hands resting on her swollen belly. When Oliver finished, she didn't respond with fear or anger. She responded with a plan she had been developing for weeks, anticipating this very move. "Mr. Finch believes we are wounded," she began, her voice resonating with cool authority. "He's seeing an echo of a scandal, but he isn't seeing the current reality. He thinks I am distracted. He is mistaken." She proceeded to lay out a multi-pronged defense strategy. It was brilliant. It involved restructuring the very debt Finch was acquiring, preemptively, buying back key bonds through overseas shell corporations she had set up the moment she took control, and simultaneously launching a massive, forward-thinking, green energy initiative that would instantly boost the company's stock value and public perception. It was a move her father would have called a beautiful checkmate. She concluded, "Alistair Finch is a scavenger. He is circling what he believes is a carcass. He will soon discover he is trying to hunt a lioness. Let him try." As the board members left the meeting, their anxiety was replaced by a renewed, almost zealous loyalty. She hadn't just saved the company, she had fortified it. A few days later, Genevieve was leaving a late meeting when she saw a familiar figure standing hesitantly across the street from her office building. It was Kinsley Munro. She looked profoundly different. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple trench coat. The confident predatory aura had vanished, leaving behind a woman who looked tired and lost. On an impulse, Genevieve had her driver pull over. She lowered the tinted window. Miss Monroe. Kinsley started her eyes wide with shock and fear. Miss Atherton, I'm sorry to be here. I don't know what I was doing. Genevieve studied her for a moment. She could have been cruel. She could have enjoyed the victory. Instead, she felt a flicker of something else, a detached sense of pity for a woman whose entire life had been built on the flawed premise that her value was tied to a powerful man. You bet on the wrong horse, Miss Monroe, Genevieve said, not unkindly. My advice to you is to stop betting on horses altogether. Find a way to build something that is yours alone, something that no man can give you, and no man can take away. Without waiting for a reply, she signaled for her driver to move on, leaving Kinsley standing on the sidewalk stunned. It was not forgiveness, but it was a form of closure, a dismissal of a player who was no longer in the game. The final echo of her past life came a week before her due date. Oliver Bennett brought her a news clipping from a local Queen's paper. It was a small article about a man arrested for public intoxication and disorderly conduct after causing a scene in a local bar, screaming about how he used to be a king. The name was Spencer Caldwell. His mugshot was almost unrecognizable, bloated, unshaven, with the desperate, empty eyes of a man who had lost everything because he never realized what he truly had. Genevieve looked at the picture at the face of the man she once loved and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even pity. He was simply a ghost, a character from a story that was over. She folded the clipping and dropped it into a wastebasket. Her phone rang. It was the head of her new energy division, announcing that their first solar farm had officially gone online years ahead of schedule. As she took the call, a smile spread across her face. She was no longer dealing with echoes of the past. She was building the future. Her future, her empire, and her baby kicked as if in agreement. Genevieve's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. It's a story of devastating betrayal, but also one of incredible strength and the reclamation of one's own identity. She was pushed to the edge only to find a power within herself she had kept hidden for far too long. She didn't just get revenge, she got her life back on her own terms for herself and for her child. What do you think, was her public takedown of Spencer justified, or should she have handled it privately? Do you believe a person can truly change after such a profound deception? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening to this dramatic story. If you were captivated by Genevieve's journey, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who loves a story of epic revenge and empowerment, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama, intrigue, and justice. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update.